Misery.
You did it! You murdered my Misery!
Annie!
Misery is considered one of the best Stephen King adaptations. A lot of it is for good reason. It has a very small cast of intelligent characters, but it works well because they are smart in their own ways, and with their differing personalities, they don't ever seem to compete for screen time, which really helps with the flow of the movie. Now I'm going to break down the movie with heavy spoilers because it's old, and honestly, I want to talk about it. Movie starts off with our main character, Paul, who is a professional author who is known for writing a successful series called Misery. Paul just finished his manuscript and is driving to drop it off in the middle of a snowstorm. Paul's car careens off the road and knocks his ass out. Coincidentally, Paul's number one fan, Annie, picks him up and saves his life. She brings him back to her place to nurse him back to health. Paul wakes up 2 days later bedridden. The accident messed up his legs, shoulder, and neck. Annie tells him that the roads are too bad to take him to the hospital. Yeah, I buy that. She also says that the phone lines are down. Starting to seem like a too good to be true scenario for Annie. Meanwhile, Paul's literary agent phones the local sheriff, Buster, asking if he can look into where Paul is since he hasn't been seen for a while. How thoughtful of her. Meanwhile, Annie's giving Paul a straight shave. Nah, she's not gonna make a meat pie out of him. But they are shooting the shit, and Annie straight up tells Paul that she's been stalking him and that's how he's alive right now. Paul has been a famous author for a while, so he handles it like a pro and brushes it off as being like cute or something. As a reward, he even lets Annie read his manuscript, which is the first book not related to Misery that he has written in years. Annie comes back with her critique of his book, and she blows a gasket over the swearing. And we get our first sign that Annie's a bit crazy.
I'm not crazy! Ah!
Buster and his deputy wife are out looking for clues, and they are probably the cutest old couple ever put to film. Annie heads back to the house from town. Oh, so the roads are open. Nah, just the one into town, not the hospital. Annie says the hospital said as long as there is no infection, no rush. And the hospital will send someone when the roads are clear. Oh, so the phones are working? Nah, just the ones in town, not Annie's house phone.
What? Oh, come on!
Anyways, Annie also brings home the latest Misery book. Unfortunately for her, she's about to find out that it's the last Misery book. She bursts into the room screaming that Paul murdered Misery. She really died during childbirth, but do you think Annie gives a shit?
I want her! And you murdered her!
I mean, shoot. Do you think Annie gives a shoot? Annie destroys the room before confidently telling him that she didn't call anyone and no one knows where he is. And if Annie dies, he dies. Good night, Paul.
Yikes.
Paul attempts to escape, but it goes about as well as you'd think, but he was able to play it off like he fell out of the bed. But the next morning, Annie says that God told her to save Paul by making Paul burn his new manuscript. Poor guy. But don't worry, Paul. Annie has a great idea. She is going to force you to write yet another Misery book. Oh, don't worry, bud. She won't let you pretend the last book didn't happen. You have to put real effort into writing a sequel.
Time's tough, huh? Shit.
So Paul does whatever he can to get out of the room to eventually get out of the house while Annie is away. But the time windows are short and Annie has thought things through pretty well, so Paul's going to have to push his wit to the limit if he is going to get out of this. Meanwhile, the police find Paul's abandoned car, and even though they didn't find a body, they presume he is dead. Luckily for Paul, Buster isn't so convinced, and he starts reading the Misery books to give him any kind of a lead. He even gets lucky while reading and notes a particular quote that sounds familiar to him. One night, Paul is very proactive and gets a kitchen knife after Annie shows him her gun. He also finds her serial killer scrapbook.
I understand killing some people, but who wants to go home like, big day?
That morning, Annie tells Paul that she knows he's been out of his room, so she has a special surprise for Paul.
It's for the best.
Annie, please!
Almost done. Just one more.
Later on, Buster overhears Annie's road rage while she's in town, which gives him the inspiration to look up old newspaper clippings, and look who just so happens to be quoting Misery lines while they're on a trial for murder.
I want her! And you murdered her!
So Buster heads over to Annie's. Annie is able to stash Paul away before she entertains Buster snooping around. She almost gets away with it, but at the last second, Paul gets Buster's attention, and just to be on the safe side, Annie kills Buster, which has got to be one of the saddest deaths I've seen in recent film history, or just out of the movies that I've seen recently. Annie believes that they both must die, but Paul convinces her to let him finish the book. So he speed finishes it and gets everything ready for his last shot at escaping. Paul sets the final page with all of the last twists and turns in the Misery series on fire. Annie dives to save it, and Paul knocks her down with a typewriter. They fight, and I have to mention that people who hate profanity in movies, they always have a breaking point in their final moments, and it never fails to make me laugh.
The profanity bothers you.
It has no nobility.
I'm gonna kill you, you lying cocksucker!
Their fight gets as intense as it gets, and Paul uses a statue or trophy of Annie's pig named Misery to deliver the final blow. We flash forward 18 months, and Paul is sitting down with his literary agent talking about his passion project. He even admits that Annie helped him write it. The movie ends with Paul hallucinating Annie as a waitress who says that she is his #1 fan. And we cut to credits. So how was it? It's a great movie across the board. Everything is top notch. One of the highlights is how poetic the final fight is. Paul uses the typewriter he was forced to use to bash Annie in the head, his legs that she crippled to trip her, the burnt pages of the shitty fan fiction that he was forced to write to gag her, the statue or trophy of the pig named after his books to finish the job. Unfortunately, in the fight, we do get the worst scene in the movie. Yeah, that looked pretty bad. One other gripe that I have is that we never get a scene of Buster's wife reacting to his death. Maybe it's just me, but I thought we saw them too much to not have any kind of closure for them. Other than that, it's a great movie that everyone should see. One of my favorite lines in this movie, it's a line that Annie says when she's very, very miserable, stating that she loves Paul but knows he doesn't love her back because she's not a movie star type of a person, and then she goes on to win an Academy Award for her role in this movie. This is legitimately a great film. I would seriously have to nitpick to the finest little detail in order to find some reason to hate it. I don't hate it. I think it's a great film. I highly recommend it, and everyone should add it to their watch list. And hey, the next time you're driving in a snowstorm, maybe swerve the steering wheel a little bit. See if you encounter a psychopath who inspires you to write a very famous book. Thanks for watching, and stay spooky.